This week, on this third Sunday of the Easter season, we look again at Jesus' post-resurrection appearance to his disciples, only this time from the perspective of Luke's gospel. In this morning's reading, we find the disciples and their companions concerned over the late-breaking news that Jesus was reportedly making appearances to different people around the area, despite everyone's sure knowledge of his death. And as they were comparing notes with each other, probably examining the details of one witness account against another, who do you think makes his appearance but Jesus himself? And Luke's gospel describes the disciples as being understandably startled and terrified. And so Jesus says, "Look at my hands and feet. See that it is I myself." Look and see. There's a big difference between looking and seeing. When we look, we may observe people that are broken, people who are victims of society, or people who are simply surviving the best way they know how. When the disciples looked at the marks on Jesus' hands and feet, they saw the reminders of all that is wrong in the world, all the injustice, all the cruelty that humans are capable of inflicting upon one another. But Jesus asked them to do more than just look. He invited them to really see who he was. If we can stop looking at our neighbor and instead see our neighbor, we will discover something altogether different. We will see what Harold Kushner describes as every human being as fashioned in the image of God, the attractive and the plain, the pleasant and contentious, the physically perfect and the physically or developmentally disabled, the articulate and the stammerers. All of them are manifestations of a God who is big enough to encompass them all. We are invited to see as the famous sculptor Michelangelo saw. There's little doubt that he was one of the history's greatest sculptors, a man who could transform a solid block of marble into a beautiful, lifelike piece of art. But even considering his genius, how could Michelangelo carve something like the masterpiece of David from a giant block of stone that was so ruined that his contemporaries considered it ruined and a thing of no value? The answer is simple. Michelangelo looked at the block and saw his David locked inside. Michelangelo held an important belief about the art of sculpture. He believed that in each block of stone there was a figure hidden inside, waiting to be revealed. To Michelangelo, the master sculptor's job was to clear away what was not the image and reveal the masterpiece inside the stone. Jesus invites his followers, both first century followers and 21st century followers, to do the same thing. He invites us to look at one another and see the masterpiece that lies within each other. But Jesus went even further, inviting his disciples to come a little closer. Don't look from a distance. Touch me and see. This man Jesus, who had spent so much of his life touching others, was asking for the same thing in return. He had touched the sores of lepers, and with that touch brought healing. He had touched the spirits of everyone he came in contact with, and with his touch, the people were transformed. Now Jesus was asking the disciples to do the same thing. They had spent the last 3 years or so watching Jesus touch and heal, touch and heal. And now it was their turn to touch and be healed. healed of the barriers they had built up around their lives. Barriers of fear and prejudice, religious and political barriers, psychological barriers that alienates one person from another. If we can dare to reach out and touch that which we fear, we have a chance of being healed of our fear. Healing and transformation indeed took place among the disciples that day. A transformation described as in our reading as moving from startled and terrified to that of joy and wonder. When we take a risk and step out of ourselves, touching the lives of someone else, we are the ones who are transformed in the process. We move from a state of terror to that of wonder. But looking, seeing, and touching are only the beginning. Jesus, not satisfied with just a tentative and hesitant touch, asked even more of his disciples. He always does, you know. He asked to be fed. This man who had fed thousands with just a few loaves of bread and some fish was asking for the favor to be returned. This man who had fed the spirits of multitudes, including the people in that very room, was asking for food. And so the disciples shared with him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it. For the past 3 years, the disciples had been spectators. They had witnessed amazing miracles, watching Jesus bring about healing with just a touch, sometimes just a word. They had watched him transform lives, feeding the bodies and spirits of people along the way. But there's a big difference between being a spectator and being a participant. You can't be a disciple from a distance. You have to roll up your sleeves and risk getting some dirt under your fingernails. Being a fan of the team isn't the same as being a team member. Now Jesus was giving them a chance to see what it's like to actually participate in ministry. Essentially, Jesus offers an invitation to the disciples and to us to evolve and mature in our spirituality in a way that John Dominic Crossan describes in his book, The Greatest Prayer, Rediscovering the Revolutionary Message of the Lord's Prayer. In his book, the author talks about 3 different types of prayer, the first of which are prayers of request. Those are the sorts of prayers in which we ask God for things like healing and protection. As he points out, there is nothing wrong with prayers of request. There is everything right with taking our hopes and fears to God. And neither is there anything wrong with the second type of prayer, prayer of thanksgiving and praise. In fact, there is everything right with gratitude for the mystery of existence, the challenge of life, and the glory of creation. But there's a third type of prayer known as prayers for empowerment. A prayer for empowerment shifts from the disciple as spectator to that of the disciple as participant. It moves us from expecting God to fix things for us and applauding God for doing so into collaborators with God for creating justice around us. In this morning's reading, Jesus moves the people in the room from a spectator state to a participatory state of discipleship. They move from looking to really seeing, to reaching out and touching, to feeding. And we are asked to do the same thing. Just as our prayer life matures from that of the please and thank you prayers we were taught as children, to the prayers of empowerment, such as the prayer of St. Francis, which begins with the words, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Just as our prayer life matures, so too should our life as followers of the Christ mature from that of spectator disciples to participant disciples. That happens when we see, touch, and feed our neighbor. It happens when we move from a state of complacent, feel-good religion to one of hands-on ministry. It happens when we are willing to take a risk and make ourselves vulnerable. Jesus asked his first century disciples to feed him, and he asks nothing less from us. In Matthew's gospel, he reminds us that if we feed, clothe, visit, or welcome the stranger, we have done it to him. May God grant us the courage to see, touch, and feed our neighbors. In doing so, we see, touch, and feed Christ himself, and we experience a transformation in our own lives. Amen.